In the Hojoki, Kamo no Shomei first experiences suffering, then withdraws from the world, learning detachment, then realizes he has become attached to his detachment. This leads to a realization that he needs to ride the proverbial ox back home. So many of our practices only get to stage 6 of the 10 ox herding pictures. Does Sheikh Issa or do you, any of you, talk anywhere about how one transcends the practices and what happens at that stage? Can we leave aside our ox to rest at peace wherever we are here and now?
Well, you still might have affection for the ox.
I think this is exactly why you, Tarika, the Tarika, are wise to talk about the need for service as part of your practice or part of your community. Because if you can just become your own personal echo chamber and bounce back and forth between practices and attachment and detaching yourself. But for most people, the easiest and best way to get out of your own ego is to love somebody else.
Right. Riding the ox into service might be the best way to ride the ox. And if you don't feel like your very being depends on the ox, then you're not distressed about anything that, you would be really sad if ox died, but you wouldn't feel like, you were completely dependent on it.
Well, yes, service is important, not only to its effects on eroding the ego, if it's well done, of course, but also the value of community and support. It forms that, I won't say a necessary, but a complementary basis for the practice. But in point of fact, the only practice I know that addresses the term of being attached to the practice is the direct path, because I've heard Greg and others talk about sort of the last stage is deconstructing your attachment to the practice.
Right, which doesn't mean that you turn your back on the practice.
No, not at all.
It means, it's like if you love something, let it go, or a person.
Right, and you're still with all of the precepts about beauty and morality and conduct. All of that continues. It's the relationship that's different.
Yes, exactly. Detachment is not necessarily turning your back on something.
Indeed, yes. In fact, there may be a Madhakara out there about how detachment is not indifference.
Well, that would be a good one.
You remember that one, Sayyidah Zainab?
Yes, it rings a bell, certainly. But I also realized that another way of breaking down the ego is to get married.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because if you have a partner which mirrors you, then you see your reflection in them, and they see their reflection in you.
Yes.
I was saying the same thing about having a dog at the beginning of this conversation.
Yes, I heard that. Yes.
Well, in any relationship, there's mirroring that goes on, and there's also the wonder of the other person sneaking into your heart.
Well,
so
ideally, I think marriage is an equal partnership, but having a dog really does help to tame the ego, because it is very humbling to know that someone owns you.
Yes. Well, you can't reason with the dog, so you can't always be right.
Yeah, and the dog can't argue either, like the other partner could. So that gives ego a really good ride. And even if it's trying to stand out, or if it's trying to if it's trying to make itself prove right, the other partner will, no matter what, keep banging down until they prove you wrong. But I think with animals, they're very forgiving, and because they don't have the gift of speech the way that we understand, we don't really know what they're feeling or what they want to say.
Sayyidah Zainab, have you ever had a dog?
Yes, I have. Growing up when I was young.
because in my experience, they can talk to you and they can argue, and they always win the argument.
Yeah.
Maybe I was
Yeah.
very young at that time. Maybe that's why I haven't had that experience with dogs.
Well, they can resist what you want them to do, especially if you want them to go to the vet. Not all dogs are that way, but it certainly isn't uncommon. So what about the ox?
So what about the what?
The ox.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, service, and yes, bringing the practice into the rest of life
Right.
and sharing it. And sharing
Yes,
it.
exactly. Being fully in life
Yes.
in a way that you couldn't before you went out and found the ox and wrote it back. I'm reminded of the how that many of the early Christians would go out into the desert for a period, but then they'd come back and serve in the church, and sometimes they were called back by the church to come and take a position and guide people. But finally the journey comes back to the origin because you never left it. So it's a nice cycle. I mean, it's the going out and coming back, and you don't come back the same.
Wait a minute, say that again.
It's about going out and coming back, but you don't come back the same.
No.
It's not, or you could say it's not the same you that went out that comes back.
It's like we're all on a highway to God, but a really large number of people in the modern world happen to be having battery trouble, and it just be polite for us to pull over and help them jump their car.
Yeah, there's a place for that. But if you run your own battery down in the process, then maybe that's not so great.
Unless that itself is the point.
Well, possibly. Yeah.
It's like, I've heard it described this way, but basically you can be on the road and the road is never ending. And you think at first, oh, here I am, I'm stopping, while all these people are passing me by and I'm doing these small acts of help and service. But that's the point anyway. Stopping by the road is, and performing these small acts actually is the lightning path. And again, it also comes down to attention. Are you helping people because you think by helping people you're going to have an epiphany of God, or are you helping people because you truly, genuinely want to help them? Helping people out of self-serving motivation generally tends to not be fruitful. I'm not saying it's backfire. Doing a good deed is never a bad thing, but you should do it with the proper attention and proper motivation and
ideally privately if you can, so you're not even tempted by some recognition of the good that you did. Well, with regard to the cars on the road, maybe running your battery down is a form of kenosis.
Yes.
There you go.
Well, I like that formulation of the running the battery down and giving others jump starts.
Besides, at the end of the ox herding pictures, both the ox and the ox herder disappear in union.
Well, sure, they ought to.
And so eventually the battery and both cars, both drivers, they all are absorbed.
Yeah, well, we all disappear, so we just need to remember that.
All right, next one. Lawrence writes, man has God within the walls of himself. In the very, very darkest continent of the body, there is God, and from him issues the first dark rays of our feeling, wordless and utterly previous to words. The innermost rays, the first messengers, the primeval, honorable beasts of our being, whose voice echoes worldless and forever wordless down the darkest avenues of the soul, but full of potential speech. Our own inner meeting. Lawrence puts forth something of a body mysticism. How can we utilize our bodies to find God and find God in the pulsating blood flowing through our veins?
Well, I think looking for it anywhere is probably not the right approach. Even in the blood flowing through our veins, it's not, as long as we're looking for.
Yes, If
It's
we're
a problem.
simply observing what is or what's happening,
Right.
that's neutral and beneficial. So that's what I would say. I've spent some time in meditation, just trying to be aware of my somatic experience of life. And it's funny because at a certain point the body disappears. All there is sensation. All there is perception. So maybe that's when the walls of the self collapse.
I like that description. The body disappears. There's only sensation. Yes.
Right. I mean, how do you know you've got a body? Because
Well,
you can see part of it and you have all these sensations that remind you of the concept of your body.
yes. Well, much of the, not much of, but certainly a part of the direct path satsangs we've been to includes body awareness drills.
Right.
The point being to find out what your body is and, more importantly, what it isn't.
Right.
And I've heard that activity spoken of by several people as being really an important element in the process of knowing oneself.
Well, I think if you're going to become aware, you ought to be pretty aware of the one thing that's always there with you.
Yes.
Maybe not the only thing that's always there, but something that's always there. In a certain sense, remembering your body can be forgetting it if you've already had a clear experience of what it really is, or what our experience of it really is. And if you let the concept crystallize, you're all of a sudden not in connection with it as much.
True. So yes, I think the body has a role to play if we can give it the right kind of attention,
right,
and not either too much or too little, I suppose.
Yes, it can be a gateway to the outer, but it can certainly be a gateway to the inner, which is usually what's overlooked.
So, as I was listening to Lawrence's words, it struck me what a feminine description it is, because it's all about, I'm talking about cosmologically feminine. It's all about what's within and what's enclosed and what you find deeply on the inside.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me that the obvious answer to Budria's question, how can we cultivate this kind of almost mystical awareness of our body, is become pregnant, because that's I mean, it's a natural thing, but it's that kind of cosmological experience of the feminine, because there at the deepest center of your being, you have someone else. It's very shocking.
Yes. And that you're nurturing.
Yeah. And you become, for the first time, not just a person, but also a place. And that's a good experience. True. But, that's some of the symbolic meaning of pregnancy. It's accessible to everybody because it's one of these natural symbols that's built right into the cosmos. But it's a very good experience for somebody like me who tends to feel like a ghost in a machine. And that's my own Cartesian problem. My body's always felt like something I'm driving around, and the older I get, right, the more I feel like that. And that's really frowned upon in Catholicism. We're not supposed to think of ourselves as bodies and souls. We're supposed to think of ourselves as, I don't know, embodied souls or something like that. Yeah. But I've never been able to get it, but I think I would be a lot worse off if I hadn't had those experiences.
Yes, indeed.
Well, the body may be a vehicle, but we shouldn't be so eager to jump to the conclusion that we're the drivers.
Yeah, that's right.
But interestingly enough, that's one of the things, Abby, that I actually quite like about Catholicism, and one of the things where it's more similar to ancient traditions than to many contemporary traditions, because so much of spirituality, whether in certain forms of Islam or certainly Hinduism, Buddhism, it's all about get away from the body. Whereas traditional Catholicism and all of the like ancient pagan religions are like the soul and the body go together. That's why, the soul is either reincarnated or there's the resurrection of the body. It's not necessarily the same body, but at least at a certain sense, for a certain time, that the soul and body work together. And
Yeah.
you have major metaphysicians talking about this, like who we are, maybe not in the deepest sense, but who we are relies so much on the body. Just imagine yourself as a disembodied soul.
Yeah.
Sort of hard to do that. And that's why, there is that narrative of, transcending the body, but it's not like most people do that in a single lifetime. And it's very compelling to me that whether someone is reincarnated over many lifetimes, or whether there's, let's say, a resurrection of a subtle body into heaven, and then following that some form of union, it just sort of makes more sense to me. And any time you think about any form of continuity, continuity without memory, without some form of being embodied, is somehow difficult to imagine.
Yeah.
I appreciated that you understand that about Catholicism. That's a very deep understanding that most even Catholics miss. And although the resurrection of the body is in our creed, it's a core belief of Catholicism.
Yeah.
And it can't be accidental that, oh, and by the way, you get your body back. If we're to have some kind of body, and not a different body and not the same body, but a resurrected body, if we're to have that in the afterlife, then it must be an aspect of who we are, not just disposable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think you need to sort of have a form in order to perceive other than you. Either that, or you live in a hologram that used to be hidden in your body.
That's that thought experiment. If you were brought into being in a state of complete sensory deprivation, would you be conscious?
Of course you would.
Yeah,
Of course you
It
would.
seems obvious.
Of course you
to
would.
you.
yeah. There's a lot you wouldn't be conscious of.
And maybe you could even separate the thinking part from the conscious part.
Yes, but if you never perceived anything, what would you think about?
I think a lot of the perspective that, let's say, Orthodox Sufis and Vedantins, they take their cue from a philosophy of being, Shankara and Parmenides. It's a static view of being. Whereas I personally do not find that particularly compelling, because I think it's somewhat one-sided. And I find that Heraclitus and the Kashmir Shaivite sages probably come closer to the truth, though maybe going too far in the other direction, but it's a necessary corrective to also focus on becoming, because there's being without becoming, or becoming without being. The both of them go together. Just imagine that you were held in stasis at the age of 35 and nothing would ever change. You just simply are. That's not the way it works. God is not static. God God is being, and is beyond being also, but also God is becoming. God is not a static thing.
That's
Right.
the imagery of the burning bush, which is burning but not consumed.
Exactly. And Pascal, when he had his mystical experience, I think that it's very telling that he simply wrote one word down: fire.
Well, he elaborated on that a little, but that was where he started.
That's where he
Right.
started. Of course, he
Right.
elaborated on it. I mean,
And he's not alone in that. Other mystical experiences have been described in terms of fire, or burning, not in the painful sense necessarily.
Yeats wrote, "O chestnut tree, great rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance? How do we know the subject from the object, the doer from the done, the practitioner from the practice?"
By mistake. um, when I read this a few minutes ago, it reminded me of some T.S. Eliot, which I have captured, which I will now read. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. Good stuff.
Sure.
It's all there.
It's all there. So yes, by mistake.
Just an aside, it's interesting how Eliot, who wrote some of the deepest and most serious poems of the last century, also had a book of funny poems about cats. Have you read those?
Oh yeah.
McCavity. There's no one like McCavity. He's broken every human law. He breaks the law of gravity. That's from there, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And the fact that anybody could read Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats and say, I think there's a musical in this, would be a genius.
Well, what was the musical based on then?
That book.
Yeah. So, all right. So there was a genius involved.
Yes, Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Oh yeah, he was pretty smart.
A work you obviously know well, Abigail.
Just that one poem.
So how are we doing on the question here?
Other than saying by accident, is there anything that we can say about this in a, let's say, not a deeper way, a more fun way?
Yes, by asking that perennial question, who's practicing?
Right. Well, or to finally discover the point of it.
Yes.
Because, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? It's all of the above and more, and none of the above.
Yes. And I suppose by not having to put things in those kinds of conceptual terms is one way of breaking that particular connection or dependence. The
Right.
very fact that we asked, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? It's an artificial question,
Yeah. How you could say, instead of how can we know the dancer from the dance, the question might be, how is it that we think there's a dancer and a dance?
Right. And there's only the dance.
That's, yeah.
This has been a very metaphysical evening.
Well, it happened.